Good evening, Hoosier Nation, and welcome to another edition of the Hoosier Tailgate Live here on thehoosier.com, powered by On3. I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith, and tonight we've got a loaded show for you. The Indiana Hoosiers enter this 2026 season as the defending national champions. Think about that for a moment. Defending national champions. Those are the words few Indiana fans have waited a long time to hear, but now comes the hard part for the Hoosiers, defending the crown. The quarterback has changed. The leadership has changed. The roster has changed. Yet the expectations have not changed at all. And tonight we're going to count down the 10 biggest questions facing this Indiana football team in 2026. Again, thanks for joining us here this evening. Got a chance, hit that like and subscribe button for us there on YouTube. Great to have you along. We're going to get to a lot of things tonight with these 10 questions that we need to kind of answer as we go along here. And but if you got a question tonight, by all means, please feel free to drop those into the comments section so that we can get them answered if possible. And we're going to get going here in a second. As you can see, we got some things we want to cover before we get rolling with all this. But, you know, it's been again, another crazy week in the world of college football. And college basketball now is kind of in their groove with their summer workouts. The football programs throughout the country are now in their camp season / recruiting with some big visits coming up. And Indiana is still waiting on a couple big things that they'd like to get done, accomplished here first. But one of them is Moshan Sells, that they're still waiting on a word from him. Every indication has led us to believe that it's still between Bama and the Hoosiers, although he is getting ready to go to Texas and a potential LSU visit. One thing I can say, he loves to be recruited. And when you get kids that love to be recruited, it's awful hard for them to come off that wagon, per se, because they enjoy the whining and dining and the attention that they get. But hopefully Indiana can lock something up here with him within the next few weeks. And the other young man out of Noblesville, the other offensive lineman, it seems that Indiana and Iowa are in the top two of Johnson's final decision-making paths there. But again, until we see the official word from those individuals, it's kind of continue to do what we've been doing all along, and that's just waiting for the word to drop that something positive is going to come. And the fact, too, with this is that Indiana has some kids now on campus that they're evaluating, some in the 27 class, but mostly in that 28, 29 class. Gives them a chance to get ahead with that as well. And I just saw today, I believe, Sharp from Brownsburg, he was elevated to a 4-star in one of the recruiting services. I believe it was 247. I'm not sure where he's at with the others, but there's a kid that got elevated now that some more information's come out there. So another big pickup for Indiana. And again, thanks for joining us here tonight. Want to say, if you got a chance, get into Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, and give us a rating there as well. Maybe a couple word breakdown of what you think of the show helps us a long way. And like I said, like and comment, subscribe here on YouTube. And, you know, when we get we have two major stories to discuss tonight. And I think first one is what everybody's seen thus far. And the Brandon Sorsby ruling and what it may say about the future of NCAA authority. Of course, the second one that came out is Curt Cignetti and Fernando Mendoza were able to be recognized in the top 100 intriguing sports figures list that came out. And with those two being the top two subjects of topics of discussion tonight, that was one thing that we want to talk about. But you see the aspects with Brandon Sorsby, former Hoosier. We know very well that he is now at Texas Tech and once again at the center of a national college football discussion, having bet on college football over the last few years, somewhere in the neighborhood of, thousands and thousands of dollars. Now, this isn't really about Brendan per se. I do hope that he is getting the help he needs, because at the end of the day, he always struck me as a pretty level-headed kid, although he left Indiana for brighter pastures at Cincinnati. But you don't want to see anything bad for the kid. And it's really not about Texas Tech per se. The bigger question is this: does the NCAA still govern college athletics? Or have the courts now become the final decision makers when it comes to these cases? Think about it the last few years with NIL, transfer portal, eligibility, enforcement. Every major NCAA rule seems to go the way of the court. That now, and more often than not, the NCAA has lost those court cases in these high-profile cases, especially. I'm not saying the NCAA is going to go away, but its authority certainly appears to be weaker than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And that should ultimately be concerning to everyone involved in college athletics, because if every rule ultimately gets decided by a judge, then you have to ask who is actually running college sports. And that's a question that isn't going to go away anytime soon. In NCAA, the presidents of these colleges and universities, they've been relatively silent. There has been some ADs that are popping up a little bit more so of late, especially around this situation there at Texas Tech. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Has the NCAA lost control of college athletics? On Jim Coyle this morning, we had a chance to talk to a actual attorney who deals with some of the NIL stuff. If you get a chance, you may want to look that up on YouTube. I thought it was very informative in talking about specifically what the judge ruled in this particular case, because there is some misconceptions out there about what was actually done in this case with Sorsby. Because he really didn't make any decision other than the fact of saying that until they can get it all figured out in terms of what is in some respects, a reasonable punishment, they need to kind of pause the train in this situation. But again, it's going to wait to the end of the year. When the end of the year comes and there's no more games in front of them, Sorsby and his crew is going to drop the case. But anyway, the other big story is the Times Sports 100 list. Curt Cignetti, Fernando Mendoza were both mentioned in that article. I haven't had a chance to read it. It was a unique recognition for Times Sports and their intriguing sports figures, and rightfully so. I guess you could say Coach Sig does fit the bill for that intriguing sports figure. But it's another way that Mendoza got named in that categories too, both named to that inaugural sports list for Time. And it's another example of Indiana continuing to benefit from the national limelight of being somebody that is continually mentioned in a national perspective that keeps that top of mind marketing ploy at the forefront of mom and dads and recruits across the nation. I think that's something to be pretty excited about for that aspect of things, and it's a definitely something that Indiana has benefited from. Some of these great recognition, whether it be Time, whether it be the White House for the national championship, SIG being invited to the Indy 500, all those things have been very positive for the university as well as the football program. And you got to think that Indiana's brand awareness continues to grow and grow, as we've talked about in the past, when it comes to Indiana and what they've been accustomed to over the years, where not much of anything's been really talked about when it comes to that for Indiana. In some respects, almost a afterthought with all that. So I guess Indiana, players, coaches, the staff there, a very well done aspect of things when it comes to recognition across the sports divide. But again, tonight we want to talk a little bit about, Indiana entering this 2026 national championship, defending national championship teams that now we've talked about some of it earlier of Indiana be kind of coming the hunted as opposed to the hunter. But there's some unique questions that have to be raised, when you talk about this year and how this will ultimately impact Indiana. But the biggest thing is, can Indiana handle this new limelight when it comes to being the team that for years has been the hunter? Now they're the hunted. And every opponent, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, has Indiana circled on their schedule. The road games become bigger. Some of the home games that they'll have this year will be, again, some big time games there at Memorial Stadium. And everybody wants to have a chance to, say they beat the defending national champions, but also some of these blue bloods like Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State would take a lot of pride in the fact of them saying that we sent them back to where they belong, as opposed to Indiana being at the forefront, taking the win out of the sails of the big boys when they all play each other. So I don't think there's any question when you ask that question, will Indiana handle being the hunted this year as opposed to the hunter? I don't think there's any question that Indiana, under Curt Cignetti and the way he does things, will thrive in an environment where they are the hunted. Not going to be easier than it was over the past few years. There's no question about that. The Big Ten is still the Big Ten. But I do think Curt Cignetti has that ability as a head coach to really center and focus a team like he's done the last 2 years. I mean, they've lost only a couple games at home. They're last year undefeated, 2 losses a year ago. One of those was in the college football playoffs. And I don't think there will be any issue with him being able to get this team ready to roll in that respect. Oh, let's see here. Question real quick before we head on. I feel like IU got big plays when they needed them every time last year. A fumble or a pick might make a difference in a few games. Absolutely. I think Indiana benefited from some of those big plays last year, especially on fourth down, making some big plays. No better game to point to than Penn State last year. But again, I think that, when they head into this season, thinking about it, when you think about these things, you think about replacing the leaders. It's a hard aspect of things. Replacing production is hard. Maintaining the excellence is hard. So when we count this down tonight, the 10 biggest questions facing this Indiana football team in 2026, we're going to begin with the aspect of being the hunted, and we talked about that here a little bit here. I just wanted to see another question popped up. Wanted to get to it here quickly. Signetti has assumed control. Well, I don't think there's any question that he is now one of the leaders of the Big Ten, and people will listen to what maybe he has to interject in certain situations. But they're going to be a team that's going to be quite tested. You got road games that are going to be big challenges for them this year. And we're going to take a quick look at the schedule this year here shortly. We'll talk about some of those games. Also, as we get going through the months of summer here, we get to July, we'll start talking a little bit more specifically when it comes to some of that stuff. But the one thing that Sig does quite well is that he has a team that he places standards on. And there's no question that he has put the expectations and standards on this football program ever since he's been here. And I don't think there's any question that these guys have embraced the standard, the blueprint, when it comes to this, because I think they will relish the opportunity that being the top dog in the Big Ten, or one of the top dogs in the Big Ten, will be a very important facet to their makeup as a team. The biggest thing this year, when you think about it, is who replaces the leadership. You had Fernando Mendoza, Surratt, Cooper, Coogan, Fisher, Pons, Lewis Moore. Those are the guys that has built the championship culture. They were the voices in the locker room, on the field, whether it be game week or summer practices. They set the standard. How is it time for someone to step forward? You can't just say you're going to be the leader now. It's got to be something that is earned. And you take a guy like, for instance, Charlie Becker. It's rightfully easy to think that he should step into a leadership role, but we don't know if that's something he's comfortable with, because not everybody is comfortable with being, quote unquote, the leader, especially the voice leader, things of that nature. But last season and what he did on the field basically provided him this opportunity to be a leader when you talk about this year, as does Carter Smith, the offensive tackle, who by all accounts should be a pretty high draft pick when it's all said and done. He's another guy that leadership is going to be expected from when it comes to, this season with these guys and heading into it. But that is going to be the biggest thing, is who leads us now moving forward. And who is that going to represent both on offense, on defense, as well as a whole unit? And I do think there's some guys that definitely will have every opportunity to do it. Isaiah Jones, in terms of what he's done, Tyreek Tucker, you look at him and what he did a year ago. Landino, another one. Sharp in the secondary, his opportunity in that respect. And then some of these transfers that have come in, they will have a chance to put their names on this as well. But it doesn't happen overnight. Those guys have got to earn it by what they do now in terms of this summer and continue to do it day in, day out. The next question, I guess you could say, is the Josh Hoover era begins. You know, how good can Josh Hoover be this year? I think that is definitely a question of that's going to have to be sorted out as the year goes. We know that he's had interception problems. There's no question about that. But we also know that this is probably one of the most discussed questions about Indiana heading into this year, because there is a difference between what Fernando brought to the table and what Hoover is bringing to the table. And one of them especially is the scenario centered around the interceptions that he threw a year ago. And while no two offenses are the same, that is one question that this coaching staff is going to have to answer. And with Josh and how that experience, his talent, arm strength, all that is very much in his favor. Can he make good decisions with the football? Can he make the type of decisions inside the red zone? Fernando did not have a turnover in the red zone last year. That's, you know, a very remarkable stat. And the same thing for Josh will be the expectation of making good decisions with the football and especially getting points in the red zone. Because if you don't have that, like Fernando did last year, it's going to be hard to duplicate what Indiana accomplished last year if you're turning the ball over in offense. That's in itself is always the big thing that you look at, turnover margin. Can you retain it? And can your defense create it? I think last year, Indiana, I think, was a plus 18, if my memory serves me correctly. Again, that's a phenomenal thing that they were able to accomplish a year ago. And they should be able to accomplish that type of stuff again this year. The other thing that the next question, question 7, in this 10-question quiz that Indiana will have to answer heading into 2026, can this wide receiver room reload? And Indiana lost a lot of production in that room last year. Surratt, Cooper, Nowakowski, I call him a tight end, even though he's a tight end, he was a part of that as well. And I think that Indiana getting Tyler Morris back, you brought in Nick Marsh from Michigan State. You've got Shaz Preston from Tulane. And we talked about Charlie B. Can Brock Schott become a bona fide big-time tight end that can block at the point of attack, but also be a threat in the passing game? And it's probably going to take more than one true tight end to do that. There'll be other guys involved in that rotation. But I think there's no question that this team will have a very, very good, if not one of the top wide receiver rooms, not only in the Big Ten, but maybe the country in terms of potential productivity and the ability to spread the ball around will be there as they involve each and every receiver, from the RPOs to back shoulder throws to all the things that we've seen Indiana do over the last few years, there's no question that they can pretty much repeat, if not maybe be even a little better this year at that wide receiver room than anybody could think of. And especially too, this kind of goes hand in hand in the running back room. When you lose your top two rushers, who are those next guys? You got Martin, you got Turbo, those two guys coming in and getting one back from the catastrophe of an injury a year ago. And again, I don't think there's any question that you shouldn't be excited for this skill group of receivers and running backs to be something that this Indiana offense has plenty of talent to go around and cause defenses problems, especially if Hoover can be consistent in what he does at quarterback with high efficiency. That's going to be the biggest thing when you talk about his situation in this offense. But I like the track record that Shanahan and Cignetti has, having Tino back. That brings a sense of continuity within their scheme. All those things. I think it's definitely a skill group that has reloaded for this year. Next big one you got to think about is the offensive line room. And we've talked about it before, but this offensive line room, let me get some of this, set up for a bit, is again, last year we went into the season knowing that Indiana had a very capable offensive line room. And it played out, even with some of the injuries. No question that Pat Coogan in the transfer portal was a huge get, per se, and all that, and what he brought to the table. But again, you got Carter Smith leading that charge. You got some other guys that last year, although they may have been overshadowed, their play up front was critical in the sense of the productivity that offensive line had. It was collectively a 5-guy, 6-guy group effort each and every week. And you got to feel the same going into this year, although losing Coogan is a pretty big loss, but you got to like what's all back up front. And some of these young guys that got a lot of reps in the spring are going to provide the depth that Indiana's going to need, because as you know, very seldom does the offensive line stay intact the entire year. And Indiana has had their fair share of injuries over the last 2 seasons where they've had to have guys step up, and they've done that. But I do believe that this offensive line group is definitely ready. And I think that Coach Bosted has done a great job, as he's done the last few years, in developing that group. So I do feel like this offensive line, coupled with the skill guys, are definitely in an arena that should continue the productivity that we've seen over the last few years come out of this offense led by Coach Shanahan. And then the last one here, of course, is establishing the run game. As we know, that's vitally important as well. We just talked about this, but I do think Indiana will have a physical running game. I thought, Black, Hemby last year were both physical backs that, could get the tough yardage, that 3 or 4 yards every play. They always seem to be leaning forward. I think the same thing is true with this group of running backs. I think Martin's going to be a special kid. I look for him to be the breakout player offensively, in my opinion. And Turbo, I think he's going to bring something to the backfield. And we'll find out from that point forward if the guys are ready to be a 3 headed monster or go back to a two-headed monster like they were this past year with 2,000 yards rushers. So again, offensively speaking, you got to feel that Indiana can answer any of the questions that may be posed about their offense, whether it be at receiver, offensive line. We know the tight end position is probably the biggest question mark heading in 2026. We probably won't have an answer for that question until we see these guys play in live competition, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to truly evaluate these tight ends is getting them out there in live game situations. See, David had another question. Preston, Morris, Bond, Chandler, step up, trust, and yeah, again, we've said this before. If you're not excited about the wide receiver room and the depth that they've got in that room, I don't know what to tell you, because we've seen these guys, be able to go next man up mentality with a lot of it, and they've done it quite well. And the other thing with this running game, and I think even Sig has said this about Josh Hoover's success starts here with the running game. Having a bona fide running game alleviates some of that pressure, and it lends itself to third down success. And it also lends itself to red zone success, because when you look at that aspect of things and you think about, okay, what's the verdict with this group? You got to think that, again, most important position group on the entire football team is the offensive line per se. But again, the running game and the backs that we've got in that system are going to be very important as well for Indiana this season. And I don't think there's any question that Indiana will be able to do as good as, if not better than, they were a year ago on both offensively running the ball and throwing the ball. And I think it will help Hoover immensely being in an offense that is not expecting him to force the ball down the field like TCU did. And that was TCU's makeup. They were about forcing the ball down the field. And while that maybe create a lot of excitement and stuff, it also creates a lot of interceptions. And him being in an offense now where he's going to have some things that are going to complement him and allow him to be a part of it and not have to be the part of it like that TCU. He's going to be able to flourish in this offense, I think, just as much as Fernando did, because Fernando came here, 42 sacks his final year at Cal, 42. And I don't think they gave up, 6 maybe last year? And that's all because how quick they get the ball in and out of the hands of the quarterback. But it also comes back to the success that this offense has had on first and second down. And when you have that success and that efficiency, it makes it awful tough on a defense to really get into any type of rhythm at all. And this offense can put a hurt on you real quick. And they've got the same guys this year to do the same thing because of the big time playmakers they have at running back as well as at wide receiver. I like it. Okay, Hoosier Dave. I'm glad you like that, from the hunters to the hunted. Hey, if once in a while, blind squirrel finds acorn every now and then. I guess you could say that's the kind of how I was with that. But there is a pretty much a rhyme and a reason for it, because Indiana, for the better part of the last few decades, has always been the hunter. And this will be a completely different vibe heading into 2026. Hey, we're going to step aside, take a quick break here, talk a little bit about the Hoosier.com and some of the specials there, as well as Fanatics. We'll get you that link for Fanatics in the comment section. Couple of new segments there at the Fanatics storefront. Game day essentials, not too early to look at that and what's laid out there for you. Take a look at what's available. There's always daily specials going on there at Fanatics, but we'll be back right after all these messages here on Hoosier Tailgate Live on thehoosier.com.
Hoosier fans, if you want the best coverage of Indiana football, basketball, recruiting, and the Big Ten, there's only one place to be. Join thehoosier.com, powered by On3. Get insider recruiting intel, team news, transfer portal updates, premium analysis, and exclusive coverage from the staff that covers Indiana athletics every single day. Right now, new subscribers can get 50% off their first year. And after that, it's just $119.99 per year. Don't miss breaking news, VIP content, and championship-level coverage. Visit thehoosier.com today and stay ahead of the game. Thehoosier.com, your home for Indiana Hoosiers coverage. Indiana football fans, get your officially licensed Indiana gear today at the Hoosier Tailgate Fanatics storefront. Jerseys, hoodies, hats, collectibles, tailgate gear, and championship apparel, all in one place. Look for the link in the description to the Hoosier Tailgate storefront and gear up today.
Welcome back here to the Hoosier Tailgate Live on thehoosier.com. Great opportunity to get over there to thehoosier.com and pick up that subscription, 50% off. You're going to get a lot of things, including all the On3 stuff, the rival stuff, and of course, all the information there about the Hoosiers, with Alec and Colin providing the biggest part of the content this year. They do a great job in that respect. So Indiana and the Hoosier.com go hand to hand when it comes to getting great coverage each and every week with it. Heading over to now the defensive side of the ball, we kind of answered some of the questions that are coming up with the offense heading into this. And just as much as the leader on offense is a question mark, there's also that question that proposes itself on defense. You know, who's that? You know, who becomes the defensive alpha, I guess you could say. And one of the things that I would say we could start with by saying this, and true with Indiana last year, every great defense has a great leader, a voice, a heartbeat. I don't think there's anything last year encompassed that any more than Aiden Fisher last year, because he was somebody who holds everybody accountable. He makes everybody responsible. Somebody who you could count on when adversity hit. You know, that defense responds to those type of leaders. And there's no question that Aiden was one of those guys last year. Indiana had several of those guys when you think about it. Besides Fisher, you had D'Angelo Pons, you had Lewis Moore. Those players were more than just talented. They were leaders. They were the voices of the defense. And they were the players everyone looked to when the game was on the line. And now they're gone. And someone else has to step forward heading into this season. The good news is leadership almost always emerges. Somebody steps into that void. The question is who that will be. Will it be a linebacker, a safety, a D lineman? We may not have a total thumbprint on it yet. And that's one of the reasons why it's such a big question. Because championship defenses have to have leaders on it. For me, if I had to sit here and say who those guys will be, I don't think there's any question. Isaiah Jones is like Charlie Becker. They weren't expected to do much a year ago, but all they did was come in and make plays when they got the opportunity to play. Didn't matter the situation. It didn't matter whether they got 9 snaps or 29 snaps. They made the best out of each and every opportunity they got. And it is not about the number of snaps somebody gets. I always tell players that all the time. It's not about how many plays you get. It's what you do with the number of plays you get. Because if you go out and make plays and you're only getting 4 plays a game, but you make plays, you're going to get maybe 6 the next game. And it kind of goes. And that's what happened with Charlie last year. And I don't think talent will not be an issue with this defense when it comes to leaders, because I think you can go from the interior all the way out. You got Hardy and Jones at linebacker. You've got Landino. You got Tucker up on the inside. Sharp on the outside. And that's a kid, Sharp. He wasn't even projected to start last year, but he had such a great camp. They couldn't get him off the field. I mean, they were thinking it was going to be Gandy, the kid from Pitt, Amari Knight, the kid from Northern Illinois, who's no longer here. I mean, that was what the talk was. And the talent that this team has, I think that leader on defense will very well be identified quickly, if not already. And again, the summer goes a long way into it, but I do think when it talks about leadership, offensively and defensively speaking, I think Indiana has enough able leaders on both sides of the ball that are not necessarily rah-rah guys, but are guys that a lot of them lead by example in how they do things. And I would count Isaiah Jones and Charlie Becker as those two guys that lead more so by example than by being a very loud voice in some respects. And that doesn't always, play well if you're a guy that never shuts up and you've always got something to say. It's knowing what to say and when to say it is the most important thing. And I think that no one did that better last year than Aiden Fisher. And I think there's no question about that when it comes to this squad. Let me see here. Another question David has to say, probably one of the best linebacking cores in the country. I wouldn't say that is too far from it. I like both those guys in there, Hardy and Jones, in that respect. Let's get to question number 3 here now. And I think the biggest question with this one is, can Brian Haynes do it again? He's had the top defenses in the Big Ten and the country the last 2 years. He finally got recognized as the best defensive coordinator in the country this past year. Finished second in that category a year ago. I don't think there's any question that this defense is more about being a reload more so than a rebuild. I think this defense, I didn't say it's a good defense. I'm not going to even say it's a um, solid defense. I think it's an elite defense. I think Indiana has the ability to have an elite defense again with who they've got on the defensive side of the ball, who they added to via the portal to make it even a better defense in some respects than a year ago. Because being an elite defense now is the standard. The standard is set that Indiana's defense is elite. And it's proven itself the last 2 years. And these coaches that work with Coach Haynes on defense, they work so well together, and I think as does the offensive group. I think as much success that Indiana has, I think a lot of it can be attributed to how well both sides of the ball's coaching staffs work together in terms of putting kids in the right position and taking advantage of their strengths. And I think Indiana did that the best the last 2 years, especially on defense. Um, there's going to be some changes. I mean, not everybody's going to do the same thing as they did a year ago. Um, Indiana's goals now are not to be bowl eligible anymore. It's to win and compete for Big Ten championships as well as college football championships. That's kind of the standard now every year. And if you're going to win you're going to win the Big Ten championship, or you're going to win a chance to get a national championship, there's no question you got to have an elite defense. Indiana does that. And I think they've done that in the last 2 years. Whoops, sorry about that. That Indiana's been able to put the elite defense together. And I think Brian and his coaching staff has done a great job of identifying what they do really good and finding ways to exploit every weakness they can find on an offense and change it up enough that it can be a little confusing to make offenses maybe a little slow in that respect. But Indiana is always going to have this losing talent. Did they bring enough talent in? But I do think this year, again, what they brought in, the two kids from Kansas State, man, those guys coming off the edge are going to be scary. And that's not even, saying what else Indiana has there coming off the edge, as well as what Indiana has out in the secondary. Not just at corner, the two safeties, uh, big time players. I don't think they'll have any problems finding some answers defensively speaking when it's all said and done. And I don't think Indiana will take a step back this year when it comes to defense. Might get some of your guys' take on all that to see if you feel the same way when it comes to Indiana and their defense. Are they a team that you see defensively being as good this season coming up? Are they that elite defense they were here this year? Can they be elite again in your guys' eyes? How I look at it and how I've watched tape of these guys, I don't think there's any question their front seven is going to be as good as, if not better than it this year. And I think they got guys in the secondary that can cover, and they're going to be challenged on the outside. There's no question about that. But I do think they've got a chance to be every bit as good as they were this year than they were last year at the defensive side of the ball. With all that, see here, who's your fan? Speaking of elite defense, I have to think that with all the scuttle about TT allowing Sorsby, does Brewster reconsider his commitment based on potential distractions now and in the future if he plays? Oh, good question. I'm not quite sure there. That one maybe pause for a second. That may be something to think about it. Yeah. David, yep. And Duquay, no question. He's another guy that I think will have a big impact on this defense this year. And he had a lot of impact on him a year ago. And when he came in, that kid played. He had a heck of a game against Oregon. If you guys remember, his game against Oregon was pretty on point when it comes to turnovers that he caused in every shape or form. With that, let's talk about this schedule that Indiana has. We're going to look at it from two things about repeating as a Big Ten champion. You can see here by Indiana's schedule this season, the big hole game against Ohio State, tough road game at Michigan up in Ann Arbor, and then they come home and play Minnesota and USC at home. Minnesota follows after the back-to-back games against Ohio State and Michigan. So that has a tendency to be a trap game, although I like the fact that it's going to be at home. But Indiana's at home for the first, 4 weeks to start the year. Playing UNT, then Howard, then Western Kentucky. And don't think that one's going to be a pushover either. Western Kentucky's caused problems for Indiana when they've come into Memorial Stadium. Northwestern, remember Chip Kelly is now the OC there, so it's going to be a little bit different than what we've seen from the past because of Chip's background in the spread offense. So that's another team that right now may be under the radar, but I look for them to have a pretty good year this year. Then Indiana loads up, heads out to the East Coast to Rutgers. Shiano's always tough to play out in New Jersey. Then they head out to Nebraska the week later. So they go to 2 road games. Then they come home against Ohio State on the road at Michigan, Minnesota, USC, big game out west at Washington, and finish up with Purdue at home. So this schedule definitely is a little bit more challenging when it comes to who they're playing this year, where they have to go. And they're going to have to, like a year ago, they're going to have to go into some hostile arenas and win games. And they were able to do that a year ago. Like they went out to Oregon and Iowa and got big wins and didn't play that well against Iowa when you think about it. There's no question that they are going to be a big draw on the road at some of the places that they're going to go. I mean, Michigan, you know how well they draw. New coaching staff there. And that'll be a big one. Washington, going out to Nebraska. Remember the last year that they played Nebraska, they embarrassed them at home. And don't think that's not in the back of the minds of that coaching staff right now when it comes to that game. And there's going to be some still doubters out there that want to say that's still Indiana until they prove that they can put, multiple years back to back to back to back. There's going to be those out there that are not going to truly think that Indiana has gotten over the hump as we know it. I think there's no question that they have in that respect. Let's see. I don't think Western Kentucky has ever beaten a Big Ten team. Hard to think that this team would be. Well, I can't sit here and say one way or the other. I know under Tom Allen's era, Western Kentucky gave them everything they could handle, both at Western and at Indiana. And kind of like North Texas. Those are the two teams that people want to say, well, they're not P4 teams. Well, they're probably one of the better G5 teams out there when it comes to it. When it comes to that. On the edge, no one's talking about Burrow. Yep, no question. You can, and that's going to be the thing with defense when you talk about it, Roger, is remember they're a little top heavy in the defensive line. I mean, they've got, I think, 18 bodies. Well, you cannot keep 18 bodies happy, especially if the difference between the top four and the next four is very minimal. So that's one thing with this defense is there are going to be some great competition to get on the field. And there's going to be some great competitions to be backup players. And how you become a backup player is you're going to have to be a contributor on special teams. And no greater motivation when you say to be in the top 22, you better be on at least 2 special teams. And meaning that nobody's above it. And Indiana has excelled in the special teams arena for the last 2 years. Again, a part of the standard, part of the blueprint of what SIG believes in. So, but that defensive line, a lot of talent. But again, you look at that, schedule, and here's a little bit better one. Let me see if I can pull this one up here quickly. Yeah, there we go. Gives you a little bit better view of it. This kind of goes hand in hand with the next question, and this is the first question out of all the ones that we've answered thus far. Can Indiana repeat as national champions? That's the question. Every year the defense continues to produce because of what Brian Haynes has put and built around the individuals that are a part of that defensive group, the system that they employ, the scheme and everything that they do, and of course the culture. And that culture expands not just from the defense, but through the entire offense, defense, organization, you can say. The expectations are the same. The accountability is the same. Only some names have changed who's going to be trotting out there as the top 11 on either side of the football. And I don't look at this year's team as a rebuild. I think this is more of locking and loading than anything. I think their recruiting has been above and beyond. I think they've got the right bodies in the right spots. And again, this is all goes towards everything we heard Signetti talk about from day one. It's all about the blueprint. It's all about the standard and fighting complacency day in, day out. But there's no question that this schedule that they're going to face this year is definitely going to be tougher, especially in that latter part of the year than they had a year ago. And when you look at that, Minnesota's sitting in there, like I said, that's a trap game. I'll tell you that right now. They're sandwiched between Ohio State and Michigan, and then USC and Washington. So that game right there is going to be a key game in this whole schedule for next year. And like I said, we'll go through this a little bit more in depth as we get to the month of July, breaking it down a little bit more when it comes to that. But again, those are the 10 top questions in my mind that the Indiana will have answers for heading into that first game against North Texas. That'll already be answered. I think they answered some of it already in the spring. They're going to be able to plug some guys in and not miss a beat. I think they're going to have depth, especially on the defensive side of the ball, so they can play, more than 11 bodies on the field. David asked, will they play a third backer this year on defense? Oh, yeah. They'll figure out a way. to integrate that into their system. Now, it may not be a true linebacker. It could be one of these, big size DBs. I mean, you got Baldwin out there who's a pretty big dude that can play that outside linebacker. But again, Indiana, I think, is a team that not only will contend for the Big Ten championship again this year, but will have a chance to put themselves in a position to compete for a national championship. And again, a lot of things have to go in their favor. There's a lot of bounces that got to go your way. You make your own luck. Indiana's done that. They've done it for 2 years now. And they're coming off a year that unprecedented success, 16-0. The change will be they will no longer be a team that's going to sneak up on anybody each and every week. So again, those are some of the questions that Indiana will have to get answered. If not already answered, there'll be some question marks to define who's going to be in that top 22 on either side of the ball. But be excited for this ball club and what SIG has put together to come off a year, the last 2 years that they've had, 16-0 this past year, Big Ten champs and national champs, to have a team coming back that they can still be a contender and reload as opposed to having to rebuild, because that doesn't always happen, especially at a team like Indiana, who's not in the realm of the blue bloods per se, of Ohio State, Michigan, LSU, Alabama, and such. Thanks for joining me again here tonight on the Tailgate. Remember, we're here each and every Thursday night. Be back next Thursday at 7:30. Get over to thehoosier.com to pick up that subscription, as well as the Fanatics store for that game day essential collection that we've got over there. You can find a link for that on my Hoosier Tailgate X profile. There's a link tree there that will take you right to it as well. But until next week, next Thursday night at 7:30, I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith. This has been the Hoosier Tailgate live right here on thehoosier.com. Good night, everybody.